Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, August 25th around here, and we got football to talk about. We have actual football to recap from this past weekend. Iowa State gets a huge win over there in Dublin, massive win over Kansas State, and very sloppy game early, but we'll talk about how it got much, much better at the end, and Iowa State looks like a team that can compete for the Big 12. Then we got fall camp intel, a lot of different things going on. Bryce Underwood has been named the starting quarterback for Michigan. A couple updates for Miami, looking a little bit stronger on defense than you would think, and a couple other things there. And then we'll turn the page to week one. We'll get into a couple of questions getting into week one, a number of things around Ohio State, and some new play callers down there that we'll talk about at the end of the show. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. We had football this past weekend for the first time in 215 days. That's how long it was between the Ohio State Notre Dame National Championship and this game over there in Ireland this past weekend. And it was a sloppy game early. For about 2.5 quarters there, they were not playing great football, and I think the coaches would tell you that. Now, the defense has played very well. Obviously, rain was very much involved in this conversation throughout this game, but it was sloppy. There's no doubt about that. In the first half alone, we got 3 fumbles, a muffed punt by Dylan Edwards, who actually left the game after that, going to be a huge injury if he can't come back for Kansas State soon. Offensive line caught a pass, and it was actually the first pass that was caught in the game. 1 of 3 red zone trips ended in any points for either team. It was all over the place. It was very, very sloppy, very ugly. A couple of play calls that I thought were a little bit weird, especially in the rain, but at the end of the day, they've kind of found their stride towards this second half and played some really good football towards the second half of this game. Iowa State is a team that really kind of tried to find consistency throwing the ball and really did later on in the game, but Rocco Becht kept them in this one. You know, in the first half, the most consistent offense they had was Rocco Becht's legs. He made a couple of plays here and there, definitely was a guy that was leading the way, although the numbers were not that great. And the rain was a huge, huge piece of that. A number of drops on both sides. Neither quarterback was just standing in there and throwing the ball confidently, particularly Avery Johnson, but it happened to Rocco Becht as well. Came away more impressed with the Iowa State pass catchers. When you have Eli Green and Brett Eskelson making catches for touchdowns, when I thought coming in Chase Sowell or Xavier Townsend was going to have to step up for this team to be, even in remote danger down the field, it's a relatively deep group. I do think it's a group that could really develop into a nice one. Love what Eli Green brings to the table. I think Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend, although they were not heard from much in this game, will be big players down the way for Iowa State. But regardless, came away really impressed with what Iowa State had to bring to the table. Thought they did a very, very good job in this game, especially towards the end, getting that pass game going. If you were just sat watching this game, Avery Johnson looks like he had a day. It looks like he put together an incredible performance. Almost had 300 passing yards, had 3 total touchdowns. He just never really looked comfortable until he threw a couple of balls down the field, especially the 63-yard touchdown that kept them in this game. Really, really remarkable throw. Outside of that, there were no, breathtaking throws. There was the deep shot to Jace Brown, but it's a little bit underthrown to a wide open guy. So there's definitely some worries there. It's definitely a little bit up and down, but at the end of the day, the conditions, the circumstances around this game totally changed the way that we talk about this game. So not necessarily going to bury Avery Johnson by any means. Definitely still some worries that I'd like to, get past with him, but it's definitely not the way that Kansas State wanted to start their season. They were the favorite in the Big 12 going into this thing, although there weren't many quote-unquote favorites in that conference. Kansas State was looked at as the team to beat, and Iowa State went in there and they played really, really good football. Also, the final drive from Iowa State was incredible. They go down and they score to go up by, I believe it was 10 at that point, 24-14. Kansas State makes a massive play. Right on the first play, they go 65 yards on one play, make a massive, massive throw by Avery Johnson. And then Iowa State gets back on the field like that didn't happen. They get back on the field and have absolutely no doubt in what they're going to do. Carson Hansen really starts the offensive line of Iowa State, who really struggled early in this game, especially with some of the simulated pressures that they were throwing at him. Thought Joe Klanderman on the Kansas State defensive coordinator side did a great job in the first half. Can't really help that you're getting blown off the ball in the second half. The offensive line for Iowa State played really, really good football, and then Taylor Moser made the play call of the day at the very end of this thing. I had Carson Hansen leak out on a 4th and 3, went down to the goal line, and for every under-better out there, they got very, very lucky. He was just short of the goal line. For every over-better, man, I apologize. That was a tough beat, but it's only up from here. That's the good way to look at it. When you get that out of the way in week 0, you're rolling the rest of the way. But I talked about this, going into this game. I said the loser of this game was not going to make the Big 12 title. I fully believe that. And it's not to say that Kansas State is a bad team or they don't have a shot to do that. It's just to say they're staring down a schedule of teams that are right around how good they are, and they pretty much have to run the table. Maybe they can lose one more in conference, but the reality is they have a lot of stuff to figure out. They have time to figure it out, but it's definitely one of those things that this game was going to decide which one of these teams was behind the eight ball, which team was in front of it. Kansas State is quite a bit behind it in a conference that I don't know if you're going to be able to make up even that margin in the time that you have. So that's something to watch. Maybe Kansas State can prove me wrong, and I'd love for them to, but I'm still going to lean into Kansas State will not be in the Big 12 championship, and we're going to look back at this game as a huge turning point for that. On the Iowa State side, they can win the conference. There's no doubt about that. It was not pretty football in the first half, and if they play that level of football, then we have a little bit of a problem. But I thought Rocco Beck played the game that he needed to play. It wasn't pretty in the first half. I believe it was under 50% completion and going into halftime. He made the throws that he needed to. He had unique toughness that he's always had really throughout his career, but he made big-time throws when he absolutely needed it to. He made big-time runs when they needed him to make those plays. And then on the other side, you had Carson Hansen take over this game late in this one, and when you have a team that can go down the field with, I think, 5 minutes about left in the game, 5.5 minutes left in the game, and win it without giving the ball back, you have a team that can win the Big 12, because all of these teams are going to be so variable and so weird and all over the place throughout this season. The one that just plays consistent, the one that is the steady Eddie of this conference will win it, and Iowa State seems to have at least that idea. They have that ability to be the even team, to be the team that can run the rock, that can impose their will late in games and hold on to these even 10-point leads in this conference. That's going to make a huge difference. Obviously, we'll find out more about this conference, and I don't know how pretty it'll look this weekend, but it's week 0. So let's not try not to overreact. Kansas State still a very good team, still in the race for the Big 12. Just puts them behind the 8 ball, and Iowa State in a great position moving forward. Then you have this UNLV game. UNLV 38, Idaho State 31. This is something. This UNLV team is something. I don't know what to say about them. Really, I can say they're going to be really fun to watch for just about anyone that's not a UNLV fan. This is a very weird team, and a team that I don't think they're going to be very good on the defensive side of the ball. Now, they have names, and that's all well and good. They are a very talented team on paper. These guys didn't work out at other stops for a reason. These guys are at UNLV for a reason. So I think you're putting them in a position where Jaden Thomas had to save you in some respect in this game. Went for 147 and 2 scores when they absolutely needed them. And he might be the best running back in the group of 5 this year. There are a number of really, really good players, even just in the Mountain West, with Scott Trey Humphrey down at New Mexico and a number of other guys. Sire Gaines up there in Boise State. Jaden Thomas is a difference maker, and he is a guy that they're going to need consistently throughout the season because Anthony Colandrea and Alex Orji showed that they can be shaky at times. Anthony Colandrea overall played a really good game. Alex Orji obviously had that massive fumble on the goal line that kind of got this thing kicked off for UNLV on a very weird note, but at the end of the day, I think UNLV is in a position where they're just going to be a weird team. I think they can put it all together. I think Dan Mullen can get, especially this offense, playing really well, but they might have to score 40 points a game to really win this thing. So they're still a team that I'm going to be watching very closely, still a team that absolutely can make a run at the CFP, but I came away fairly nervous about this team right after this one. Also, shout out to Jordan Cook on the Idaho State side. Not a perfect game by any means, but had a receiving touchdown just for fun, had a passing touchdown, I believe, and played really, really tough, really good football. UNLV comes out on top, but not necessarily feeling super great if you're a UNLV fan right now. This might have been the story of the weekend outside of Ireland for a number of different reasons, but Kansas looks like a contender, and it really just comes down to if Jalen Daniels is healthy, this team can do really special things. We saw what happened towards the back end of last season. We saw what happened the season before that, where they start 6-0, college game day comes to town, everyone is around that team. They fall off a cliff from there for a number of different reasons, but he went 18 for 20, 176, and 3 touchdowns through the air, added another 47 on the ground. Probably should be taking less hits. I understand you want to get out there and show that you're healthy and be able to run, and that's part of what makes him special, but he might want to calm down just a little bit. I think taking all those hits is a very, very nervous thing for Kansas fans, but he was able to stay healthy through this one. Cam Pickett stepped up on the outside, a guy that is huge for the depth of this receiving core. If they can get Emmanuel Henderson added into that, it's going to be a really fun group on the outside. Maybe not quite as good or experienced as a year ago, but still plenty good. And they obviously have Daniel Highshaw and a number of running backs that are going to add to this thing as well. But this Kansas team is fun. This Fresno State team is not going to be a bad team. Now, I don't know if they'll compete for a CFP spot or a Mountain West championship, but they're going to give teams a good run for their money in certain games, and Kansas handled business very comfortably. They get Missouri in 2 weeks. They go to Missouri, actually, in 2 weeks. If they find a way to win that game, they could be 6-0 walking into Texas Tech with everything on the table for this football team. It's a huge one. There's no doubt about that, but Missouri's still trying to find a quarterback. So if they don't have that fully figured out by then, I don't know. The Jayhawks go in there, win that game, and then maybe they're the team to beat in the Big 12. Western Kentucky got a pretty comfortable win over Sam Houston. There was a moment there where it got pretty interesting, and Hunter Watson and company started making some big-time plays, but Maverick McIver can really spin the rock. He threw for over 400 yards, came over from Abilene Christian, the FCS level, to Western Kentucky this offseason. Really good player, and absolutely a guy that fits what Western Kentucky likes to do. Matthew Henry, Katie Hutchison on the outside. Marvis Parrish is someone that really kind of popped in this game, a running back for Western Kentucky that could very well be a big-time star in the Conference USA, and obviously it's kind of tough for that Conference USA champion to find their way to the CFP. If Western Kentucky goes undefeated, then things could get a little bit interesting, and this is a team that has a lot of offensive firepower. If they can tighten the screws just a little bit defensively, this thing could get interesting for the Hilltoppers. Then we got Hawaii Stanford, and this was a great nightcap. There's no doubt about that. This was pretty much the perfect college football game in a lot of different ways. It was weird football. It wasn't perfect. There were a couple of coaching decisions that didn't make sense. There were a couple of plays that were a little bit all over the place. We had Micah Alahado, battle through an ankle injury for the second half of this game. Stanford really felt like they had something going early on in this game. Micah Ford made play after play for this run attack, and they got their first touchdown by a running back since 2023, or at least the first rushing touchdown for a running back since 2023, which doesn't seem real, but at the end of the day, Stanford does come out on the wrong side of this one, and really, I just want to talk about Kensei Matsuzama. An incredible story. The kicker for Hawaii that made the game winner. If you haven't heard the story by now, he was living in Japan when he was 20 years old, was working at a steakhouse at the time, took a trip to the U.S. to see an NFL game, and fell in love. And since then, he had been learning how to kick just from videos on YouTube. He's just been getting his work in from YouTube videos, understanding the kicking game a little bit better. And then he went to JUCO in Nelsonville, Ohio for the first part of his career, had made his way to Hawaii, and made the biggest kick of his life this past weekend. Incredible, incredible story, and the reason that college football is special. I tweeted it earlier this week, but he is the reason, among a number of other players in this sport, he is the reason why this sport is special and why it's so unique to every other sport in the world. Nichols dominated Incarnate Word, and I give a little FCS love because I feel like we have to early on at the very least, but this is a huge FCS upset. There's no doubt about that. This is a team, Incarnate Word, that came in as the number 4 team in the country at the FCS level. Tommy Rybacki was taking over for Nicholls State as the head coach. This was his debut. Massive win. Also, Deuce Hogan, sick name for your quarterback. So I really, really do like this team. I think they can do some really, really cool stuff. And Incarnate Word, after 2 years where they had 60 touchdowns and 57 touchdowns from their quarterback, they had 0 in this game. And they got a lot to figure out on the offensive side of the ball if they want any chance at the FCS. Tarleton State had the most straightforward win of the bunch this past weekend. Trey Page was a dominating force in this game. Had 170 yards, 2 scores, and Portland State didn't really have a shot. I think a lot of people knew that going in, but Tarleton State gets a big win, continues on their way, a top 10 team in the FCS. NC Central gets a big-time win over Southern, 31-14. This was the Chris Mosley show, 174 on the ground, 1 touchdown, dominated the line of scrimmage. Now, Southern ran the ball really well as well, went 250 on the ground, but no pass game for Southern, and that did him in. NC Central wins a huge one there. And then a bizarre situation in UC Davis Mercer. It was declared a no contest after a long rain delay in the third quarter. Decided that it was unplayable, and they made it a no contest. Really weird scene. Doesn't really change the grand scheme of things in the FCS. They're not in the same conference. Will be an interesting thing when it comes to playoff seeding, but overall doesn't really change much for these teams. Also, shout out Mercer for those helmets. Those are very, very cool. But that's totally side point here. Overall, an incredible first weekend. It was far from perfect. It was a little bit all over the place. There were coaching miscues. There were a lot of player miscues. There was what you would expect from week 1, or week 0, excuse me. It was weird football for a lot of different reasons, but college football is back in our lives, and that's all that matters. It was an incredible weekend with a lot of really good moments, some great characters, some new heroes of college football, if you will, and a massive win for Iowa State in their pursuit for a possible CFP bid. But let's take a break here. When we come back, we got fall intel all over the place. We got Miami's defense looking the part. We got Bryce Underwood, the new starter at Michigan, and a number of other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about week 0. It was a very weird weekend of football. There was not a lot of really great football out there for a number of different reasons, but there were close finishes, there were some great moments, and there were a couple of heroes that were born, which is always what you want. So let's get into some fall camp intel. This is the last week of fall camp. Really, a lot of them are kind of wrapping up, getting into game week. Everything is kind of kicking up a notch, obviously, but there are some couple of things that I want to talk about before we get into what is going to be a crazy week 1. And we'll start over there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Bryce Underwood has been named the starter for Michigan this upcoming season. This was fully expected. The second he signed with them, I think it was, I don't want to say promised to him, but at least expected that he would be the starter for this team going forward. He's a freak of nature. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be the best athlete on the field pretty much every single time he's on the field, maybe except when they play Ohio State because Caleb Downs will be on the field. But at the end of the day, he is going to make jaw-dropping plays. I can almost promise you that. The thing is, can he come along quickly? And if he can, the reality is if they get a win at Oklahoma in week 2, this is a real CFP contender. Now, they have a lot of things that need to come into place, even around Bryce Underwood. I think the offensive line is going to be totally fine. The running back room, I think, is really talented, but younger guys in Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes, they need someone to step up on the outside. If Donovan McCulley can become that guy from Indiana, that would be huge for them. So, still a lot of questions. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, this guy's going to be riding the ship, and it might be this year. We'll see how quickly this thing can get off the ground. At the end of the day, Michigan fans are going to be able to see the future of their program on the field, and that's going to be a really fun thing to watch on Saturday when they face off against New Mexico. Miami's secondary is looking the part, is looking like it might be a strength going into the season. It's a shock to me. I'll be totally honest with you. I think this was going to be a better defense overall, and the secondary obviously was going to be a part of that with now I'm blanking on his name, but the guy coming in at defensive coordinator from Minnesota, very, very talented guy, and obviously this was going to be a better defense. That was almost impossible to not be a better defense from a year ago. I expected this to be kind of the group that they had to disguise in some ways. They had to kind of hide in some ways, and they were going to get beat a couple of times. Now, that still very well might happen. This is not necessarily it's obviously a zero-sum game in fall camp, so we don't really know. The reality is they feel really good about their group. OJ Federic is the guy that has come back among a group of just all transfers on the back end. It is OJ Federic that's kind of leading the way. And then they brought in Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin in that crazy scenario that I think is still playing out in the courtrooms. And then Keontae Scott from Auburn, among a number of other guys. Ethan O'Connor came in from Washington State. They have a good group. There's no doubt about that. They have a ton of talent. They had a good amount of talent last year. So there's definitely some things they got to figure out, but really, really like the group that they have. I think they've done a really good job bringing in different guys that fill different needs. I'm still a little bit wary. There's no doubt about that, and we'll see what they look like on Saturday. We'll see how potent of a passing attack they're facing on Saturday in Notre Dame once C.J. Carr takes the field. But if this is a strength, this is a CFP contender. There's no two ways about it. South Carolina, their wide receivers are looking the part. So a lot of good news happening out of fall camp, as you can imagine, as the season gets closer. But this one is another one that is massive. If this can come together, South Carolina absolutely can do what they did last year and hopefully up it just a little bit to get into the field. But Nick Harbor is going to be the wide receiver one for this group. He's officially left track behind, is going to be a full-time football player, and that's a huge thing. He is a uniquely incredible athlete. He is a guy that, if he does lock in on football, and that's the only focus for him, which it is now, he can be a special football player. Hasn't quite put it together thus far, but obviously a huge change this offseason. We'll see how that unfolds. Mazeo Bennett going into his sophomore year after around 400 yards in his freshman year. Very talented guy. Needs to continue to rise, needs to continue to get better, but obviously someone that can fit into that wide receiver 2 role. And then Jaylen Brown is a really fun piece here that absolutely can make some plays. So they might have the guys. It's still a little bit of a tightrope walk, and I'm still a little bit worried about the overall depth of the group. But the reality is, if Nick Harbor fits into that wide receiver 1, if Mazeo Bennett fits into that wide receiver 2, you have the quarterback that can get you all the way. He is an absolute beast. He is someone that I consider to be a top 3 quarterback in the entire country, and I think he's going to do special things as long as he's surrounded by good talent. It doesn't have to be great. They just have to be able to get the job done. And as of right now, they feel pretty confident about that group going into the season. Ashton Bethel Roman is the guy making waves over at A&M on the wide receiver group. This is a huge, huge update for A&M, not because they had a problem at wide receiver. They have Casey Concepcion, they have Mario Craver, they have a number of guys that are going to make big-time plays. Terry Bussey, another guy that's going to make big-time plays for them, but adding depth to this group is massive. I think this is a group that is going to be really, really good. I think adding a guy that knows the system, that's been there for a little bit longer, and is comfortable with Marcel Reed maybe a little bit more than Casey Concepcion or Mario Craver is massive, especially for those early season matchups. They get Notre Dame in week 2. They're going to have to be ready for that one. And obviously, I think the other wide receivers will be more than fine, but having one of those other guys step up, having one of those guys that's been around for a while step up is a relatively big deal. And then a couple other names to watch for A&M. Jamarian Morrow is a running back that's really started to kind of break through. They have an incredibly deep room at running back, so I don't know how much you'll see him throughout the year. Hopefully a little bit more as the season goes on, but it is a really deep group. It might be a little bit hard to really crack the rotation there, but someone to watch for sure. And then Dayon Hayes came over from Colorado to Texas A&M. Very good player. Absolutely a guy that flashed for Colorado a year ago and seems to be making some waves for A&M right now. If that's the case, they can put together a very good defensive line unit and be a force on that group. So going to be awesome to watch this develop. I think if Ashton Bethel Roman can add to what these two guys and Concepcion and Craver are going to bring, this could be a very potent passing attack for A&M. USC has a standout running back, it sounds like. Wayman Jordan is a JUCO product that came up, I believe, the number 1 running back in the JUCO ranks a year ago, and he is now up to the top level. He's up in the Big Ten. I believe he's 5'9", about 220, so he is a stocky running back. He is a guy that's going to run pretty physical, but very comfortable with his hands. Absolutely someone that can make some plays in open field, and they need it. They need a guy to step up in that position. This is maybe the 4th season in a row they've had a transfer running back, so they're going to have to put it together again. And hopefully they can, and it sounds like this guy's going to be leading the way one way or the other. The other thing we talked about last week was DJ Wingfield did not get his waiver approved for this upcoming season. It sounds like Tobias Raymond might be the starter there. I don't know what USC looks like behind in terms of depth on their lines of scrimmage. I know the front line has gotten exponentially better over the last couple of years. I don't know if the depth has gotten all that better. So that's something to watch. Definitely a huge loss for them and directly affects this guy right here, Wayman Jordan. Arizona State's run game looks really good right now, and it's something that I think everyone kind of raises their eyebrow at because you can't really replace what Cam Scatterbo did a year ago. On the field, maybe you can, or you objectively can. You can objectively replace that production. What you can't replace is what he brought to that locker room, and that's something that we'll obviously see kind of play out throughout the season. They love Kyson Brown. They love Kanye Udo. They feel like they have two guys that together can make this rushing attack as good as it was a year ago. And that'll be a tall order. There's no doubt about that. Frankly, I don't know if it has to be as good as it was a year ago because I think the pass game will take another step forward. But at the end of the day, if they have a pair of running backs to run out there, they're going to be a really good football team once again. And I feel very confident that Kyson Brown is going to become a household name by the end of the year. Feel the same way about Kanye Udo. Very physical guy that can make all types of plays for this team. It sounds like Georgia might be starting a freshman on the offensive line. Juan Gaston is the name to know all around Athens right now. He might be the starter at left guard. This is a very, very interesting thing because not a thing Georgia does very often. There are a couple of guys that have broken through on the offensive line and played in their freshman year, but doesn't happen very often over there. And Juan Gaston is just a physical freak. I think stands at 6'7", around 360 right now, and he's not quite, into the Georgia nutrition and weight training program. He's done a great job this offseason, no doubt about that, but still has a ways to go in terms of, getting his body to the place that it can be. He's going to be a freak. There's no doubt about that. He is absolutely a guy that's going to make big-time plays for him. Everyone's talking about Elijah Griffin, and rightly so. He's making waves in fall camp as well, but Juan Gaston might be the freshman that's the most important for UGA going into this season, and he is showing out right about now. Emmett Mosley, the Stanford transfer to Texas this offseason, has been a little bit limited lately in practice. I don't know how much run he'll get on Saturday against Ohio State. Definitely something to watch there. Obviously, we don't know how big of a loss it is for Texas because he hasn't been on the field yet for them, but a very talented guy that can play both inside on the slot and outside, so definitely a loss. There's no doubt about that. You could see a couple of freshmen because of this. I think you're probably going to see him anyway, but at the end of the day, Emmett Mosley is a guy that I think they were going to rely on throughout the season for a little bit of depth at that position, and might not have him on Saturday. We'll see what happens there, but something to keep your eye on for Saturday. And on the other side of the ball, Ohio State offensive line got a little bit of a mix-up this past week. Austin Sarabel was named the starting left tackle for this team. Kind of opened up a little bit of a competition between Phillips Daniels and Ethan Onyemwa on the other side. Sounds like Phillip Daniels is going to win this thing. A very, very talented kid from Minnesota. Made 3 starts a year ago for them. Played in 12 games. Very talented kid, obviously. This is going to be really interesting. Austin Sarabelt has not started at tackle in his career. Phillip Daniels has, but has not played at Ohio State, obviously. And they're going up against Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, and all of those guys on the defensive side of the ball for Texas. So that is going to be a huge thing to watch this upcoming weekend. They're going to have to hold their own. And if they don't, it's going to be a tough time for Julian Sayin. There's no doubt about that. So a lot of things to watch as we head into game week. It is officially no longer fall camp. We're officially now getting into the games, and I can't wait. We'll break down all the games on Wednesday, no doubt about it, but we're going to go ahead and turn the page to week 1. We're going to get into a couple of questions that I have as we head into week 1, and we'll break them all down right after this, so stick with us. Welcome back, everyone. We just broke down some fall camp intel. Obviously, the biggest one is Bryce Underwood is the quarterback at Michigan going forward. Going to be really fun to watch. Very talented player, probably the most talented quarterback they've had there in a very long time. I don't know exactly when I want to pinpoint right there, but at the end of the day, going to be really fun to watch that. Let's turn the page, though. Let's get into week 1. There's a number of things to talk about, but I have a couple of questions that I wanted to get into before we get into the breakdowns we'll do on Wednesday. We'll break down every single big game, obviously starting with Ohio State, Texas, and that's actually where our first question comes from. How big of a deal is it Ohio State changing both coordinators? We don't really know how big of a deal this is, and frankly, it hasn't been talked about very much. Now, obviously, with Ohio State or Texas people, they're going to talk about it more often because they're more invested in this game. But Matt Patricia takes over on the defensive side of the ball as Jim Knowles moved on to Penn State. Obviously, it's Brian Hartline at the offensive coordinator position finally for that team as Chip Kelly moved on to the NFL. So this is going to be really interesting. And Matt Patricia, very, very smart football coach, has been a head coach at the NFL level, was a DC under Bill Belichick for a very, very long time. So he's not going to be surprised by anything. That being said, the college game is a little bit different. It's a little bit more all over the place. Now, Sark's offense does have NFL ties, looks a lot like different NFL offenses out there, but it's still a very, very spread concept, very weird, and a lot of different moving parts. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. There's no doubt about that. Is a guy that understands football as well as anyone in the building, but absolutely someone that's still kind of getting comfortable in the college game, at least this time around. Will be really interesting to watch what he can do. And we don't really know how much Brian Hartline's in charge of. Obviously, he's the offensive coordinator, and obviously Ryan Day trusts him implicitly, but we don't know if he's going to be doing the play calling, if Ryan Day is going to be doing the play calling through Brian Hartline, if they're going to be doing it together. regardless, it is a change from a year ago, and I think Chip Kelly had more fingerprints on that offense than previous offensive coordinators did, and obviously Ryan Day was the play caller back then, so we'll see what happens with this. It's a very interesting storyline that I feel like hasn't been talked about on a national scale enough because, frankly, they're too busy talking about Julian Sain and Arch Manning. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, and maybe is the reason that Ohio State starts a little bit slow this weekend. Does Gus Malzahn have a little bit of magic left for Alabama? Is the question I have next. If you didn't know, he is the offensive coordinator at Florida State. I know that sounds very weird, but getting caught up on the season, there is a lot of weird stuff that happened this offseason. But he's got Tommy Castellanos coming in right there. It's a very talented kid, very athletic kid that absolutely can make some plays with his legs. There's no doubt about that. And frankly, if he can get running and he can get into open space, make a couple of guys miss, maybe Florida State gets up by 10, maybe even 14 in this game, and Ty Simpson is playing from behind, that's when mistakes happen. And there's definitely an opening here for that to happen. Obviously, Mike Norvell will have his fingerprints all over this offense as well, but Gus Malzahn has a guy that is kind of the prototype of the quarterback that does really well in his offense. Can he unlock it in week one is the big time question. We'll talk about them here in a second, but a lot of different things riding on this game for Florida State, and frankly, I think Gus Malzahn's at the very center if they're going to be able to beat Alabama. Can LSU finally start fast is the ultimate question going into Saturday night against Clemson. They have to win. It sounds really crazy. Obviously, they don't have to. If they don't win, they can absolutely run the table, get into the SEC championship, win the national championship at the end of the day. It doesn't take anything off the table for LSU. What it does do is make some fans and players look at Brian Kelly maybe just a little bit differently. I know some fans already don't necessarily love the guy, but at the end of the day, it is a very, very tenuous situation at LSU. I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to play good football on Saturday, and I think they're going to feel confident regardless win or loss. But the reality is, if they go down to 0-1 again for, I believe, the fourth year in a row since Brian Kelly has showed up, they're officially staring down Florida, at Ole Miss, South Carolina, Texas A&M, at Bama, and at Oklahoma, needing to win pretty much all but one. Now, they could get there with 9-3 possibly, but you don't want to leave that up to the committee. So at the end of the day, they would have their backs up against the wall. There's no doubt about that. And they obviously could find their way out of it, and I think Brian Kelly's going to be more than fine. I also do know there's a situation down there where they lose by 20 this upcoming weekend, and everyone wants him fired immediately. It gets to the team, and they kind of spiral the rest of the way. I don't think that'll happen. I think they're going to be fine, and I'll decide who I'm going to pick. Frankly, I haven't decided on that game yet, but at the end of the day, they kind of got to get off to a good start, at least if they want this thing to have positive energy going forward and do something really special this year, what they absolutely have the ability to do. Probably need to win this weekend. Is Miami ready to ruin Notre Dame's fun? This is a very interesting thing because it feels like this game is being talked about as a foregone conclusion for a lot of people. Notre Dame is winning it, and that's the way it is. Miami seems to have heard all of that, and they're playing really, really well in fall camp. It sounds like Carson Beck looks the part right now. I still have some worries about that wide receiver group, but at the end of the day, this is a team that's very, very hungry. They came off a year where they just missed. Obviously, a lot of new faces in that locker room, but Mario Cristobal feels that still, I can almost promise you, and they're in a position where they can go in, get a massive win in week one, and I don't think they've lost to Notre Dame in quite some time, and then they're firmly in the CFP conversation, maybe even the national championship conversation, depending on how Carson Beck plays in that game. But the reality is, if they get after C.J. Carr, if they rattle him in this game and they win it over Notre Dame, who just coming off a trip to the national title, regardless of the changes at quarterback for Notre Dame and all of that noise, this Miami team is going to have a lot of juice going forward, and it's going to be a really, really hard team to stop. So really love this game. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I've been leaning Notre Dame for quite some time, and I'm starting to rethink it. And I'll give my official pick on Wednesday, but this one's going to be really, really interesting and holds a lot of power in the Miami world. Where will the upset come from this weekend? I can almost promise you will get one this weekend. I just don't know from where. The big one, or one of the ones I'm watching, is on Thursday night. Boise State against South Florida. They're at South Florida in this game. Byron Brown and South Florida, very interesting team. And you went into last year thinking maybe they were going to be the group of 5 team that found their way out, got to the CFP, and they kind of fell on their face just a little bit. But Alex Golesh, a very good head coach. Byron Brown, a very athletic guy that had some injuries last year but is back to fully healthy in. Boise State with a lot of change. There's no doubt about that. I think it's going to be a really good team. I love Syer Gaines. Think he's going to be a nightmare in the backfield for them this year. But the reality is, it's going to be an interesting game. And you go all the way down to Florida, all the way up from Idaho. This one might get interesting, and it definitely would flip the CFP race on its head in the group of 5, would open the door for a lot of teams, especially for South Florida going forward. Then you got Mississippi State at Southern Miss. For Bulldog fans, I really hope this doesn't happen. This is going to be a very tough one after losing to Toledo a year ago. But why are you going down to Hattiesburg to play this game? You're at Southern Miss for this game. You're basically going to face Marshall from 2024. Obviously, the Charles Huff situation was a little bit interesting at Marshall towards the end of last year, but he has made his way to Southern Miss. He has a quarterback in Braylon Braxton that is special. He's a unique athlete that can do a lot of damage to a defense. This one could get close. I kind of hope it doesn't happen for Mississippi State fans because that would be a tough thing to happen 2 years in a row, but don't love them going down to Hattiesburg to play a team that has a lot of talent, especially at the quarterback position. And then Virginia Tech, quote-unquote, at South Carolina. They're playing in Atlanta for some unknown reason. But at the end of the day, was the world just a year too early on Virginia Tech? Can Kyron Drones and this team put it together a year after everyone thought they were going to put it together? Because if they can, and they can find a way to beat South Carolina, can you imagine the change in tone around South Carolina and Virginia Tech going forward, around the ACC and the SEC going forward? It would be really fun to watch. There's no doubt about that. I think South Carolina's probably going to win. I'm still kind of thinking it over, but at the end of the day, that's a team that can make things interesting in a hurry, and if they start fast, then maybe South Carolina gets a little bit nervous offensively and makes a couple of mistakes. And then who's under the most pressure going into this weekend? It's Arch Manning. From a player perspective, at the very least, it is Arch Manning. It's very clear to me. There are plenty of players that have a huge weekends ahead of them. No one's going to be talked about more, good or bad, as this kid. There's no doubt about that. He is going to be talked about as much as just about any player in the country the entire season, regardless of what Texas' record is. So strap in is what I'm trying to say. But he heads into Ohio State for his third career start, the first start he's made away from home. He's got to be ready to roll. There's no doubt about that. He doesn't have to be perfect by any means, but the weight of the world's going to be on his shoulders, and if he doesn't come out and roll right away, you can bet ESPN's going to change a lot of the narratives. They've been talking about him, and they're going to say he's a massive bust and doesn't belong in high-level football. It's going to be a huge thing one way or the other. He decides which way that goes, and that's quite a bit of pressure on his shoulders. From the team perspective, I think it's Florida State. It's so weird because I don't think they have to win this game by any means. I don't think anyone is picking them to win this game by any means. The reality is, if you get absolutely rolled in this game, if you lose by 30, if you lose by 40, you're in a position where this thing could get really sour fast. It could look a lot like those videos from the late ends of last year, for Florida State, where no one was running with Mike Norvell in the practice facility, and this team could crumble again. Now, I don't think that'll happen. I think they'll play good enough football to keep the confidence up and at least move forward and hopefully make a bowl game. But if they miss a bowl game again, it could start with an absolute blowout loss to Alabama and every player in that locker room looking up and saying, maybe we aren't that good. And we felt really good coming into this game. And then from the coaching perspective, I think it's Hugh Freeze. It's a little bit under-talked about heading into this weekend. Auburn fans think that they're going to dominate Baylor. That's kind of the elephant in the room. When you're talking about this Auburn-Baylor game, Auburn fans think it's over. They think they've won this game for at least what I've seen on Twitter. Don't get too mad at me, Tiger fans. But at the end of the day, this thing could get toxic in a hurry if Hugh Freeze goes in there and loses that game. They brought in so much talent through the portal. They have so much expectation going into this season, and a lot of Auburn fans do not respect Baylor in any way. You better win this game. I can almost promise you if you don't, it's going to get really messy around Auburn in a hurry. So a lot of different things going into this week, a lot of different questions that I could have gotten into there, but at the end of the day, that's where I wanted to stop it. A number of things coming up this week. On Wednesday, we're going to pick all of the games. We're going to get into Ohio State, Texas, LSU, Clemson, Bama, Florida State, all of the great games coming up this weekend. Syracuse, Tennessee, one we didn't talk about here. Going to be a really fun one on Saturday, I believe. But at the end of the day, we will get into all that on Wednesday. We'll get into a couple of different things, have some hot takes for the year. Probably we'll get into them on Friday, but at the end of the day, we have a lot of stuff coming up for this weekend because we got football back. We officially have college football back in our lives. It is a beautiful thing every time that it happens, but absolutely love it, and I think we're going to have the best week one that we have ever had in college football history. and we'll unpack it all on Wednesday. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that stuff. It means the world to me. It really does help out what I do here. And at the end of the day, I'll see you guys Wednesday to pick a ridiculous Week 1 slate.